Hey there, beating your dad at chess can be quite an achievement, but beating your son can even be more impressive when your son is none other than former world champion Magnus Carlsen. So for this game where dad beat his son quite in style, we have to go back to year 2000 in Norway, where Henrik Carlsen, who was quite a strong player himself, faced a then 9-year-old Magnus Carlsen, who was already developing as a player and would become a very strong grandmaster in a few years. So here, white started with the move d4, and after knight to f6, c4, Magnus went e6, and after knight to f3, here Magnus went for the move b6, leading the game to a Queen's Indian defense. d5 is a very common alternative, just transposing the game into a Queen's Gambit. But b6 has the idea to fianchetto the bishop to b7, and here Henrik went knight to c3, just to mention a few alternatives for white. g3 is very common, also a3 is a very common idea that was played later in the game, but knight to c3 makes a lot of sense, and here Magnus went bishop to b7, although in this position black had the option to go for bishop to b4, transposing the game into an Imso-Indian defense. And after bishop to b7, now white went a3. This might look like a strange move, but it prevents bishop to b4, and this knight is a very important piece because it's controlling the very important e4 square. In fact, black here already has to be a bit careful. Black correctly went d5. If black plays a natural developing move like bishop to e7, now white will play the move d5, gain space on the center, e4 might come later on, so this can already be quite annoying for black. So Magnus went d5, and here white has many options. This is very common in the opening. White played a very rare move, at least in top level play, but white's move is very natural and is actually quite dangerous. White went bishop to f4. Here white has many options like taking on d5 or playing bishop to g5, but bishop to f4 is a very natural developing move. And white has a trick that even Magnus fell for after playing knight b to d7. So here black has to be a bit careful. Black could play something like taking on c4 or even bishop to d6. Planning to neutralize this very strong bishop on f4. But instead Magnus went knight b to d7, and Magnus is known for being a very positional player, that's why he might have completely missed white's idea, which is knight to b5. So white is breaking an opening principle, moving a piece twice in the opening, which is normally not a good idea. But here white has a very concrete idea, which is amazingly very hard for black to deal with. White has the idea to take on c7 or even play knight to c7, and there's actually no way to defend that. Black went rook to c8, but now white can simply take the other pawn on a7, and after rook to a8, the knight goes back, and after rook to c8, white already has a very large advantage, a clear pawn up, against none other than Magnus Carlsen. And here white continued with rook to c1, just a very natural move. Taking on d5 was probably even simpler, but rook to c1 makes a lot of sense, increasing the pressure on c7, after taking on d5, and here Magnus played the move knight to h5, trying to fight against his idea attacking the bishop on f4. Just want to mention that black had a way to keep the game going, which was very hard. Probably an older Magnus would have seen this idea, which is to go c6, even though this allows a knight to go to d6. After we take and we take, this bishop looks quite annoying, but black has the move knight to e4, attacking the bishop, and after the bishop moves, let's say bishop to f4, black has some lead in development, white still has to castle, so here black can try to go for active play, for example taking on c4, and after rook takes, go c5, activating the bishop, planning to go b5, and bringing the queen to a5, so black would have some chances in this position, but this was definitely not easy to see. Because after knight to h5, this attacks the bishop on f4, here Henrik could have even played something like bishop to g5, being a clear pawn up, and having a very large advantage, but he was in the mood to beat his son in style, and he went bishop takes c7. So the idea is that we get a trade after rook takes, knight takes, and queen takes. This looks like an even trade because white gives two minor pieces for a rook and a pawn, but after c takes d5, we get a discover attack against the queen, so white is collecting another pawn, so this trade is benefiting white. After queen to d8, white took on e6, and after f takes e6, we get this imbalance where white gets a rook and 3 pawns for 2 minor pieces. Additionally, black pawns look fairly weak, so with correct play, white already has a decisive advantage. And before I move on with the rest of the game, Today is very special for a lot of chess players. It's Father's Day. A lot of chess players, including Magnus Carlsen, had a lot of support from their fathers to be able to develop as a chess player. So happy day to all the fathers out there. And I want to celebrate this by giving a massive discount on all of my chess courses for the next few days only. Just click the link in the description that will take you to the shop with the prices already discounted if you want to know more about this offer. So let's continue with the rest of the game. In this position, White has a large advantage. Most of us will probably play something like e3, planning to develop the bishop on f1 and then castle. But Henrik had no mercy and continued playing very actively. Queen to b3, attacking on e6, and after bishop to d5, queen to a4. This pin is going to be very annoying, as we'll see. Bishop to e7, knight to e5, putting pressure against this knight on d7, so black cannot castle. And after bishop to f6, here Henrik played a move that would normally be played by a very strong master. He went e4, just sacrificing a pawn in order to develop the bishop quickly to b5. So here Magnus took on e5. If black takes the pawn on e4, White can go bishop to b5 or even take on d7. And after queen takes, bishop to b5, White is winning the queen thanks to this pin. Or after bishop takes and pawn takes, now this pawn e4 is defended, and we get the same idea after the bishop moves. Bishop to b5, this pin is just very strong. Magnus tried king to e7, and after rook to d1, bishop to c8, this defends the knight, but bishop to c8 looks very sad. Here White could play something like castling, but again, Henrik went for the throat and went queen to b4, giving a check, and after king to f7 and queen to d6, putting more pressure on this knight that is now pinned to the queen on d8, and after king to e8, queen takes, queen to e7. Now Henrik doesn't mind trading queens, although White could have played something like queen to c6, but he went queen to d6. White has 4 extra pawns and a rook for 2 knights, so this game is pretty much over. But Magnus continued playing after queen takes and rook takes. King to e7, Henrik simplified the position by trading on d7, and after g3, rook to c8, White castled. b5, f3, White is in no hurry, but as said, the game is pretty much over. Rook to c5, rook f to d1, bishop to e6, f4. Now White will push the pawns on the king side. Magnus tried rook to c2, Henrik simply stopped the threat of taking on b2, and after rook to c7, rook to b6, bishop to c4. White has many ways to convert this, but I really like this move a4, just sacrificing a pawn to pin the bishop on c4. Magnus went king to d7 to defend the rook on c7, and after rook to d6, king to c8, e6. Now White is pushing the passed e-pawn, and after knight to f6 and e7, this is a nice deflection. Black cannot take on e7 because White would simply capture the bishop on c4. Magnus went bishop to f7, but now after giving a check, Henrik traded rooks and pushed e5. Knight to e8 is the only way to block the e-pawn. And after e6, here Magnus finally resigned. If he takes on e6, then White will simply capture the knight, and there's no way to keep the defense of the knight. For example, after bishop to g6, White has this very nice idea of deflecting the bishop again by going f5, and if black goes bishop to h5, then after g4, the bishop doesn't have any squares to go, and after bishop takes, White will simply capture the knight on e8. So this was quite a shocking loss for Magnus, and a great reminder that every master was once a beginner. Thanks a lot for watching, and I see you in the next video.